Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, President Donald Trump has warned Turkey on Sunday of economic devastation if it attacks Kurdish forces in the wake of the U.S. troop pullout from Syria, while also urging the Kurds not to provoke Ankara. Now, this comes at a time when the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, during his tour to Gulf states, is busy reassuring allies amid rising tensions between the U.S. and Turkey over the fate of Washington's Syrian Kurdish allies in the fight against the Islamic State group. Now, Pompeo also sought to reassure Washington's Kurdish allies in the fight against IS, who fear the departure of American troops would allow Turkey to attack them. Now, what does this mean for the coalition partners? And more importantly, what does this mean for the fate of the Syrians? Let's ask our panel of experts. I would first like to welcome our guest, James Dorsey, who's joining us here from Singapore, is an international journalist who has covered this region also. Welcome to the show, Mr. Dorsey. How do you see President Trump's statement coming at this crucial point?
I think one's got to look at two statements that President Trump has made. One is the withdrawal from Syria, and the other is that he pledged all along that he would not abandon the Syrian Kurds, who have been U.S. allies in the war in Syria, particularly against the Islamic State. What one could argue is, in effect, that by issuing the threat to Turkey, Trump virtually has given a political cover, a political license to Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to support the Kurds in Syria. And that, again, would mesh, if you wish, with the fact that Gulf states, particularly the UAE and Bahrain, but with tacit Saudi approval, have reestablished diplomatic relations with Damascus as part of an effort or an alternative way of trying to counter the Iranian presence in Syria.
Also, do you feel that maybe this takes away from the assurances that Pompeo has been giving to the allies? It comes at just that time, this tweet, and Ankara has also responded.
Well, I think the Turks certainly will feel that it takes away from what their understanding was of what U.S. policy would be. I don't think it takes away from a Saudi or an Emirati perspective of what they would like to see happen.
True. And then Trump's surprise announcement when it came about the withdrawing of 2,000 U.S. troops from Syria, this was considered by many analysts and experts around the world like a New Year gift to Turkey, Iran, and Russia. Now he's trying to strong-arm Turkey. Is that a correct interpretation in a way, in obliging to its terms and conditions?
I think that is a correct interpretation, although I think that everybody focused on the withdrawal of U.S. forces. And in a sense, what got lost in the noise was the fact that Trump, from the beginning, had also said that he would continue to protect the Kurds.
Right. Do you see any similarity in the U.S. administration's previous attempts also to withdraw from wars that they have been part of in the Middle East? If you are to look at Iraq and Afghanistan, do you feel that right now what is happening in Syria, their strategy is aligned to what they've done in the past?
I mean, time will tell. What may make the announcement on Syria different from what was happening in Iraq or in Afghanistan, for example, is the fact that if indeed, and there are indications, certainly the Turks are claiming that the Saudis and the UAE are cooperating with the Syrian Kurds and that they will be supplying the Kurds, then what this in effect is another form or another expression of Trump's policy, where he wants to see local partners much more engaged on the ground than they have been in the past.
So when he wants local partners engaged, but he turns around and says to Turkey that he would economically devastate them if they don't support the Kurds or attack the Kurds, how does this affect their relationship in the long term, especially in Syria, in terms of Syria?
I mean, U.S.-Turkish relations have been strained for quite a long time. For one, because of Turkish policy, not only in Syria, but Turkey's relationship with Iran, Turkey's relationship with Russia, increasingly what is perceived in Washington to be an anti-Western, anti-American policy. And so the fact that Trump is trying to force the Turks' hand here should not come as a surprise.
Right. And also, 2 weeks prior to Trump announcing the withdrawal of troops, General Joseph Dunford, he had announced that U.S. still has a very long way to go in terms of training local Syrian forces to stabilize the place. He said that at least 40,000 more local forces in northeastern Syria would be needed. But what has happened is that only 20% of that number has been covered. Does this not pose a very realistic threat to what kind of peace will prevail or the lack thereof after they withdraw?
I think if there's anything that we've learned in the last 2 years of the Trump administration, it is that you have a lot more traditional and maybe more realistic thinking within his administration. But ultimately, it is Trump who sets policy, and others have to fall in line. And so we've repeatedly seen situations like this, where officials express an opinion, including the most senior officials like John Bolton, his national security advisor, only to get knocked down by a tweet that President Trump issues.
So about the tweet, how serious is this tweet that's come out, especially in terms of what he said, what President Trump has said to Turkey in terms of economic devastation that they should expect if they don't listen? Are we to not take it that seriously, especially since it seems that it's not very aligned with what the Pentagon is doing, as experts are seeing a slowdown of withdrawal of troops and equipment from Syria?
I think one ignores Trump's tweets at one's own peril. One has to take them serious. However, what is interesting perhaps about this tweet is that he actually has proposed an alternative. So, with other words, what that tweet in effect says is, I don't want a military intervention. I do recognize that Turks have security concerns which should be addressed by a buffer zone, and there is a responsibility on the part of the Kurds to not threaten Turkey. But if Turkey doesn't go along with that proposal, then there could be severe consequences. I think that's the way one has to read that tweet.
But can the United States accept an Assad victory in Syria, given the humanitarian costs of the civil war that's taking place there?
I think there's, by and large, general agreement that Assad has won the civil war, or at least this round of the civil war. America's allies, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, have in effect accepted that Assad has won. So what the issue is now, and that certainly is an American priority, is not so much the future of Bashar al-Assad or his regime, but the ability to counter the Iranian presence in Syria. And so while the war has been won on the ground by Bashar al-Assad's forces, the strategy clearly, at least on the part of the Gulf states, is to be able to offer the financial incentives, the aid that is needed, support for a Kurdish-Syrian alliance that may persuade Bashar al-Assad to put his eggs in a different basket.
Right, and stay with us, Mr. Dorsey. Here, I'd like to welcome another guest joining us from Istanbul, Mr. John Hassassu. Thank you for joining us here on Newswire. We're talking about President Trump's tweet to Turkey, warning them of economic devastation if they didn't respect the terms and conditions, that is, respecting the Kurd allied forces in Syria. How, first of all, do you see this tweet coming at this crucial juncture of what is happening in Syria?
Well, U.S. President Trump has affected the economy and the political environment with this kind of tweets previously, and we've seen its effects sharply, actually, because it created such a manipulation that the Turkish lira lost value in the market, but it recovered within the months. After that, now this tweet was as if Trump reminding that tweet which created a big impact in the Turkish economy. But I think it's not going to be as vulnerable as the Turkish economy, I mean. But still, of course, the U.S. and any tension between the U.S.-Turkey relations will have some effects on the market.
So besides the fallout on the economy, on the Turkish economy that you're seeing there, what else is happening in terms of the realignment of allies, if I may, especially as our guest, Mr. Dorsey, just earlier said that this is in a way, it seems, giving an endorsement to the UAE and Saudi Arabia to go ahead and align themselves how they are in Syria?
Well, actually, Turkish-U.S. relations started to have some problem signals right after the 2016 failed coup attempt. And since then, the U.S.-Turkish relations hasn't got any better. The PKK, YPG problem in the Syrian territory is another, face of these problems. So the Turkish-U.S. and the U.S. administration is having this kind of problems the last 3 years, I could say. And the YPG is actually result of this, or the end example of these problems that the two countries are having. And I don't think like this thing is led to the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis to enter in the area, since the United States is having other partnership with these two countries in some other problematic areas around the region as well.
So let me come back to you, Mr. Dorsey. The way the development is going on right now between Turkey and U.S., considering the historical relationship, how it's been strained at best, especially after 2016, as Mr. Sasu pointed out. It wasn't like this was going to be a surprise where Turkey would say that we would not attack the Kurdish allies, the Kurdish militias. So what was, do you think the Trump administration expected this response? This is something that they had in mind would happen if they announced the withdrawal?
First of all, I think that actually, while the 2016 failed coup accelerated U.S.-Turkish tensions, the tensions already predate the coup and have to do with a whole variety of things, including the sale of anti-missile equipment that the Turks were looking at buying from China, Turkey's relationship with Russia, and so on and so forth. I think I just want to respond to one thing that my colleague in Istanbul said, which is that the U.S. is engaged with its Gulf partners in various other issues, and therefore it would not move into Syria. I think the one common thread that underlies everything that the U.S. and the Saudis and the Emiratis are doing in the Middle East is countering Iran. And within that, Syria is a very important battlefield. So I'm not sure that one would exclude the other.
Right. And on that note, let me ask both of you the same question. I'll start with you, Mr. Sasu. If I were to, so like you mentioned, they're countering, the one main underlying factor is Iran. So can Washington, can Riyadh, can even Jerusalem live with an Iranian land bridge of sorts, extending from Tehran to Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut? Like, this is a major threat to all these allies.
Well, everyone accepts that there is a fight of powers in the region on specific countries and areas. But what Turkey says the U.S. is building its allianceship with wrong players. So Turkey says, I am a legitimate governor, and we are a historic partner from NATO to now, up until now. And the U.S. shouldn't be going for partnerships with a terror group which Turkey is fighting for almost 40 years now. So it sounds like if we compare it, like if Turkey goes and to makes alliance with Daesh against some other enemies in the region, it's just not acceptable. And that's why Turkey is actually is opposing this idea of building partnership with the YPG. It's a very sensitive story and issue for the Turkish government and people. So it's a very important point and really serious red line of the Turkish authority. Even if the Turkish governments, any Turkish government could discuss this, the people will punish them in a way in the elections because it's a very sensitive national issue and a national security headline for the Turkish people.
It's definitely a big national issue in Turkey. There's also another threat of a permanent Russian footprint in competition for regional influence that the U.S. is always found a security threat. Does that not stand right now in the current circumstances as a security threat to the United States and its partners?
I'm not sure that the United States sees the Russian presence in Syria per se as a security threat. In fact, I don't think that the United States wants to be that involved in Syria, and Trump has effectively made that very clear. He's called it a country of death and destruction. I think the real key issue to Trump, and that does relate to Russia, is the Iranian presence. Because what we have, and coming back to the discussion you just had, what we have both in the Kurdish issue and on the Iranian issue is the fallacy that these problems can be resolved either by military force, as it is the Turkish position in the case of the Syrian Kurds, or that Iran can be forced to change its policies by effectively trying to starve the country of economic development. Fact of the matter is that both of these conflicts will only be sustainably resolved if you have a negotiation. And the problem is that nobody wants to sit at the table.
Okay, and here I'd like to welcome another guest, Newswire. Mr. Egman Bagis is a politician. He's joining us from Istanbul. Welcome to the show. Let me ask you this in light of what has been exchanged between President Trump and Ankara. Another possible chaotic situation that could unfold with the withdrawal of U.S. troops is chaos in the region and even more refugees pouring into Turkey. How big is this threat to Ankara and how are they looking to handle this?
Well, I think there's a big misunderstanding on the part of President Trump because he thinks all Kurds are terrorists and he is trying to defend the Kurds. Turkey has been the protector of Kurds for centuries in this part of the world. When Saddam Hussein was gassing them to death, it was Turkey that took them in. And today we have millions of Kurdish citizens ourselves and other millions of Kurds who have found safe havens in Turkey. So he is not to be worried about that, but he should consider what the U.S. has done in Iraq and Syria, in Middle East and other parts of the world. And it's his right to withdraw his soldiers. We respect that decision. But we are going to make a differentiation among Kurds who have chosen to become terrorists and those who are peaceful and who are producing.
How would you make that differentiation on the battlefield?
Well, those who walk around with a gun, with a rifle and killing people left and right are terrorists.
Right. So when Erdogan comes out and says that we will not make concessions to the U.S. on Kurdish fighters in Syria, it's not very clear how they can possibly differentiate on the basis of someone yielding a gun and someone not.
Well, as I said, we have been living in this part of the world for thousands of years, and we have come to an understanding of making this differentiation. Much easier compared to Mr. Trump, who is 5,000 kilometers away from Syria and who's trying to understand the local dynamics where we've been living here. And any threat of terrorism has potential to take our lives away, not his. So we have to be very careful. We will not tolerate any kind of terrorism, be it Kurdish terrorism or Arabic terrorism or Christian terrorism or any other type of terrorism. And we will eliminate terror without any discrimination.
Mr. Dorsey, let me ask you this, what our guest has just commented on President Trump's and any foreign powers' inability to recognize what exactly is happening on the field here. Him saying that Kurds are also can be differentiated, and this is something that he is having an oversight on. Do you agree on this statement?
History always has different versions and different perceptions, and I would argue that what your guest just put forward is indeed a widely held Turkish belief. It is not necessarily a widely held Kurdish belief, both inside Turkey and outside Turkey. And so the issue is not so much, to me, the solution is not eradication, as your other guest proposed, but coming to a common understanding. And that is going to have to happen at the negotiation table and in a give and take process, not really on the battlefield itself.
So the negotiating table, Mr. Hasasu, let me bring you in this conversation, your take on it also. And do you see any negotiations being fruitful, especially considering tensions are rising between these two, not coming anywhere close to resolving?
And they are saying that we have been asking for the leadership of the PKK and the YPG for years and years through the Interpol and through the intelligence agencies. So the Turks are not asking for something new or something developed newly in Syria. They have been asking, and they were chasing this leadership of the party, of the PKK, for years and years. And that's very well known. And the US is counting the PKK as a terror organization. But when these people came into Syria and they changed their brand, they suddenly become friends of the US. That's what Turkey is criticizing. And actually, they are as a journalist, I'm meeting with the Kurdish political representatives of the Syrian people here in Turkey. The Turkish government has been meeting them for the last 1 week, and they are trying to understand their needs and their complaints because the Kurds from Syria are not happy with YPG either. If we look at the numbers, there are 400,000 ethnic Kurds from Syria prefer to live in Turkey instead of being in the areas that controlled by the YPG. So that's a great sign. And there are Kurds from Syria who migrated to northern Iraq, and they are living under the protection of Masoud Barzani's KDP in the Kurdish region of Iraq. And they can't go back to Syria either because they are all threatened by the YPG, which claims to be the protector of the Kurdish people. But the Kurds are harmed before the Turkish government in this case. So differentiation between the bad and good, the people who became members of the PKK or the YPG or whatever name they have in specific areas, they're not the people that Turkey looks after. Turkey is after the people that they know from years, and they are chasing them in Kandil in Iraq, and they have been chased in Turkey, and now they are in Syria. So we have to see how this organization is working. It's just like Al-Qaeda pops up in Afghanistan and then Iraq and Syria. So PKK came out in Turkey, and it's in Iraq and Syria as well. And these new names shouldn't be a cover for such a fact.
Okay, so could be your version is that this is a cover really, and it's very clear to Trump administration how they aligned themselves behind which militias. Now, coming back to you, Mr. Baggis, let me ask you this: one of the other complications in the fate of what would happen if the U.S. withdraws is the fate of hundreds of prisoners of ISIS. Fighters who are being held in Syria. Now, the U.S. doesn't want these prisoners to be released, obviously, but what would happen in your point of view if they withdraw rapidly, as Trump had said they would from the region?
First of all, let me mention that I agree with the previous speaker. And last week, Turkey was officially hosting President of Iraq, who is a Kurd himself. Mr. Berham Salih was an official guest of our president, and he was welcomed, and he had a great visit here. We also have good relations with the Kurdish region in Iraq, led by Mr. Barzani, and we do communicate with them and we do trade with them. So Turkey has nothing against Kurds, and as I said, we have more than 10 million Kurdish citizens of our own.
Well, we've established that already, but if I were to come back to the question, what would happen to the ISIS, hundreds of ISIS fighters who are in prisons right now in Syria if U.S. withdraws? Is there a real threat that they would join militias elsewhere in the country or even elsewhere in the region?
We will not let a gap to be created when U.S. withdraws their troops, because we have promised to take care of all terrorists and eliminate them if needed. If they surrender with their weapons and if they accept to be persecuted, of course they can return back to their normal lives. But if they continue to act on behalf of this terrorist organization called ISIS or Daesh, they will bear the consequences, and Turkey will not have any mercy on them.
Right. And Mr. Dorsey, just a quick last question to you, since we're out of time here. Earlier this week, when Trump's national security advisor John Bolton said that American troops will not leave northeastern Syria until the very real threat of ISIS is completely defeated. How does this play out in the future, in the coming future, especially in the current circumstances? Do you see maybe a possible slowdown extending till the end of 2019? Or do you think that this is, in a way, trying to be a bargaining chip for the U.S. to try and get Turkey on board?
I think that fundamentally Trump wants out of Syria. Having said that, he's realizing that extricating the United States from Syria is easier said than done. And he probably is going to start to realize that while the Islamic State and other militant groups have lost significant ground in Syria, which means they may be down, but they're certainly not out. And this is not a fight that has come close to anywhere near the end of it.
Okay, and thank you so much, Mr. Dorsey, for joining us. Unfortunately, that's all the time I have, Mr. Baggis and Mr. Sasu, for being here on Newswire. With that, we're going to take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching the Newswire. Now, the second story for this evening is that while Pakistan has continuously and on numerous occasions offered talks with India over various issues, including the bone of contention, Kashmir, India has always refused to cooperate. Now, responding to Prime Minister Imran Khan's statement that Indian government was unresponsive to his peace overtures, Ministry of External Affairs spokesman Ravish Kumar from India has blamed Pakistan for the delay in peace talks, saying that Pakistan is not serious for negotiation. Now, what will bring both to the negotiating table, and how long will the Kashmiris continuing to suffer in the meantime? Let's ask our panel of experts. And first, I would like to welcome Mr. Mohammed Tahir, who is a research scholar based in Dublin and also a journalist from Delhi, Ms. Sonia Sarkar. Thank you so much for joining us here. Let's talk about what is happening between Pakistan and India, especially with India looking forward to the elections coming up this year. How do you see their relationship unfolding? Let me start with you, Ms. Sonia.
Well, as you can see that the recent statement that has come from our MEA spokesperson, Ravish Kumar, he's completely, very straightforward about the fact that Pakistan is not serious about the peace talks. And he has also given examples of how one of the ministers of Imran Khan actually attended a meeting where Hafiz Saeed was present. So that is also one of the reasons why India has been very, very consistent that if Pakistan has to talk about peace, it has to get rid of the terrorists. So one point is very clear here, that India is not going to start any peace talks with Pakistan and not even going to respond to any such call for peace talks unless Pakistan says it in as many words that we are over and done with the terrorists. So even such occasions where in public, you'll see that the ministers are attending a function where a terrorist is present. So that, of course, is not going to go down well with India. Secondly,
and you, Mr. Mohammed Tahir, let me come to you on this. Let's stay on this question. As we see relationships become more and more sour between India and Pakistan, how do you see this being a projection of elections coming up in India? And is this something unprecedented, or would you say this is totally routine?
Well, let me say there has been occasions in the past when India has used the same pretext to get away from the negotiating table, because right now, as you can see in Kashmir, there has been political mobilizations and people have expressed their desire for breaking the status quo. And right now, India's position as far as Kashmir is concerned, politically and diplomatically speaking, is very weak at the international level. Because as you might have seen in last 3 or 4 years, New York Times, Washington Post, all the big media houses in the West have taken note of India's brutality in Kashmir, and they want peace in Kashmir, and they want India to come to the negotiating table. But now, as the election is coming up in April, so the current regime, which is BJP, might not be uh, able to come to the negotiating table with India, with Pakistan, because doing that right now is not good for their election prospects. So the problem right now is the elections, and let us see what happens after that.
Right, this is a common rhetoric that we see in international media about BJP, or generally any government trying to come into power again will use quite commonly a common accusation towards Pakistan is mainstreaming terrorist organizations, supporting banned outfits. But Ms. Sonia, what is happening in Kashmir, in Indian-occupied Kashmir, is something that even international monitors are condemning. Just yesterday, 11 people were injured when Indian forces fired at thousands attending a funeral procession of the martyred Kashmir freedom fighters Zinatul Islam and Shakil Ahmed Dar. I'm sure you must have seen in the papers today. This was a funeral procession taking place where Indian forces opened fire and used pellet guns, injuring many youths.
So let me tell you, when BJP came to power in 2014, it started with a very soft approach, which Atal Bihari Vajpayee had said, Insaniyat, Jamhuriyat and Kashmiriyat. So, but over the period of time, in the past 4.5 years, actually this policy of Insaniyat, Jamhuriyat and Kashmiriyat actually transformed into a muscular approach of Ajit Doval, the NSA, and BJP General Secretary Ram Madhav, because he's taking care of Kashmir. So you can see the entire transition. It started with a very soft note, telling Kashmiris that, oh, we care for you. But actually, eventually, this muscular approach, which was started to take care of the militants, is now being the same approach is being applied to, to identify and kill the innocent Kashmiris. So, of course, this discontent is going to increase over a period of time. And of
Why
course,
do you think it
at
changed?
its peak now.
Why do you think their approach changed?
Well, that is the BJP. That's the real face of BJP. BJP has never done any serious thinking for Kashmir. They think that maar denge, thok denge is the only approach where they can get everybody, follow their line and toe their line. So that's BJP. Look at what's happening elsewhere. So it has nothing to do with the fact that, oh, things went out of hands. Things went out of hands because they changed their policy.
Do you think this muscular approach has affected their... I'm sorry, do you feel that maybe this muscular approach in Kashmir has affected their voter turnout? The polls are really going against BJP now. The party is losing seats rapidly. It's losing favor amongst the masses. Do you feel like the people of India recognizing what is happening in Kashmir is not the way to go, is actually counterproductive?
See, I'll tell you, if you are talking about the poll results in other states, I don't think this typical, any Kashmir-related issue is going to affect the poll in other states. Because rest of the India doesn't really look at Kashmir as one of the reasons for why they should vote for BJP or why they shouldn't vote for BJP. The results that you see in other states is for many other reasons, and very state-specific reasons. And there are also larger national issues like farmer suicide, and then there was no subsidy. There was a lot of other issues, like one of the issues besides farmers' issues is that this whole idea of lynching people in the middle of the street. I mean, and this whole Hindu versus Muslim fight that the BJP has created. So there are many national issues for which the BJP is facing this debacle. But as far as Kashmir is concerned, of course, actually BJP never had a mass appeal in Kashmir. It was PDP it joined hands with to come to power. But over a period of time, even the PDP had realized, and you know what happened, right? What is happening in Kashmir has something to do with very local Kashmir issue and how BJP is dealing with the issue of security at Kashmir.
And the security of Kashmir, as it unfolds, and more people die on a daily basis. Here, let me welcome another guest. Mr. Sardar Asif Ahmed is a ex-foreign minister of Pakistan. Thank you for joining us here on Newswire. We're talking about how Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Ravish Kumar blamed Pakistan for delay in peace talks, that Pakistan is not serious for negotiation. One of the biggest issues that come on the forefront are again and again Kashmir and how to end the humanitarian crisis there. How do you see this statement?
Well, you see, this is just a symptom of the real disease. And the real disease is that India has no solution whatsoever for Kashmir other than the use of force, and the use of force in a manner which is disproportionate to the threat they face. So if they think that they are going to intimidate Pakistan in this manner so that Pakistan stops supporting the Kashmir, the people of Kashmir's uprising, then I think they've misread the feeling in Pakistan. And number two, I think the other disease that is pervading all over India is the politics and the personality of their Prime Minister and his party, Mr. Modi. And I think Mr. Modi is under increasing pressure, domestic pressure. He has lost some states in the last midterm elections. And their election is due now. Mm-hmm. And he is now reinforcing his position of extreme Hindu, to catch the extreme Hindu sentiment against Muslims within India, and to pressurize Pakistan as much as he can, and to create a security situation along the line of control, mm-hmm. and to be more repressive in occupied Kashmir.
Now, let me ask you something. Sorry to cut you here.
The rest are all symptoms of that disease.
Right. Now, let me ask you something more relevant to your experience as a foreign minister. Just on Sunday, we saw the Pakistani High Commission official who was detained in New Delhi for several hours and no reason was given for his detention. He was then released. And while this happened, he was released after Islamabad filed a very strong protest, calling it a violation of the Vienna Convention and diplomatic norms. Early incidents have also taken place like this in New Delhi. How do you see this? This is something unprecedented, you would say, or it just is expected at a time like this?
No, I think they've done this before. This is not the first time. And I think they were later probably briefed that if you do this, then there will be a reciprocal reaction from Pakistan. And this inevitably happens in the world of diplomacy everywhere. But the message that I get from such actions, and I'm seeing the total picture of India and Modi's forthcoming election. This is the message I get is that there is some sort of a panic in the ranks of the government, because probably they are not getting the resonance from the people of India for the xenophobia that they are trying to spread in India, myopia that they are trying to spread in India. That resonance is not coming, and therefore Modi is a dangerous man today, mm-hmm. not only for the politics of India and in occupied Kashmir, but also for the security of Pakistan. He is likely to do something desperate, and he is likely to create a security situation between India and Pakistan, so that he can divert the attention from the domestic situation and tell the Indian people that he's the only man who can defend India effectively against any external threat, which he will try to create for the benefit of Indian public opinion. These are my thoughts on the subject on a broader landscape.
Let me come to you quickly, Ms. Sonia, talking about the BJP government's criticism as we are seeing how the role of India is unfolding on the international spectrum, especially as elections come close and close. Can you give us a snapshot of what is happening right now with political parties there? There's an understanding that there are two parties in UP that have become allies, even though BJP looks at securing a major bloc. What does it look like? How is this going to unfold in the next few months?
See, it's very interesting. The SP and BSP has always been political opponents. Okay, if either SP comes to power or BSP comes to power. But now when the two have come together, then of course the very idea of coming together is to defeat the BJP. And earlier also we had seen a week back or 10 days back where all the opponent forces had come together and they kind of had given a message to the people and also to BJP. For the message to BJP was that if we come together, you will be defeated. And to the people is that, yes, you know, this is a Gathbandhan, this is a alliance against the communal BJP. So of course there is some sort of, you know, BJP is a little worried about it, but they have already started name calling this particular alliance, and they've said that this is going to form, Modi has said in fact, that this is going to form a Majboor government, and other BJP leaders have called it like casteist alliance, unholy alliance, and a corrupt alliance. They also say that this is being formed because they fear that that Modi will come back to power. So this is all that's the political drama that's on. But this is very true that actually the by-elections that we have seen in Uttar Pradesh, because this particular alliance has happened in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So in the by-elections that we have seen is that the BJP has lost the seats where it contested the by-polls. So here there is a message from Uttar Pradesh to BJP, and plus there's already a message which has gone to BJP from the people in the by-polls. And secondly, this alliance definitely is a strong message to BJP that maybe they would not be securing as many seats as they thought they would in the next polls.
So, okay, now let me come to you, Mr. Mohammed Tahir, very quickly. We've just last few minutes left here. In February 2017, intolerance against minorities was seen to have increased in India under Prime Minister Modi. And this came out in a report by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom. It was a pretty damning report where the American body basically analyzed and said there are major concerns that minorities in the secular country are not able to practice their religion as freely as they want to. Now, in light of this report and in light of what is happening in India as they prepare for the elections, what is your take on it? Will this possibly affect future governments to maybe come back closer to the center or change their policies towards minorities?
Well, there are two aspects to it. When you talk about the minorities, if you even look at the Congress regime, which has been ruling over India for a long time, there was one report by Sachar committee which actually underlined how the Muslims and the other, socially underprivileged classes in India have been actually marginalized over the years, because there has been systematic discrimination against these communities, particularly against the Muslims. So what has BJP actually done has actually upped the ante against the Muslims and has come publicly against them, though there has always been these anti-Muslim undercurrents within the Indian body politic, always, since 1947, because there is the history behind it, like 1947 and all that. So what we are going to see now is the mainstreaming of hate against Muslims, which is plugging to the general Islamophobia, which is spreading around the world, and it becomes easy for Indian government to get away from this. But there has been, like Obama came to India last time, and he hinted at intolerance, which is increasing in India, and he actually suggested to India that you cannot progress until you take the minorities along with you.
Right. And
So I see a bleak future for the Muslims of India, actually.
All right. And Mr. Sardar Asif, if I ask you this now, that if we look at what Mr. Kumar had said earlier in this statement, in this interview, he also mentioned that it is impossible, and I'm rephrasing here, to come to the negotiating table with Pakistan when it continues to fund terrorist organizations, support banned outfits. Now, this is a rhetoric that has been going on for years and years, dating back to several incidents that have taken place, terrorism-related on Indian soil, that have been blamed for Pakistan. Now, could you comment on this, how this conversation holds any weightage and in actually being a deterrent in bringing both of them to the negotiating table?
Right now, Madam, I don't see that happening. Because right now India is very much involved. The whole Indian politics is now looking inwards to contest elections. But whatever I'll say once again is that Modi, having lost four states in the recent elections, has sent some sort of a panic signal to him. So the more he panics, the greater the xenophobia will be. Greater the minority bashing will be, greater the pressure and repression will be in occupied Kashmir. And as far as we are concerned, we are likely to see many more incidents on the line of control. And maybe if he is foolish enough to do it, there may be some sort of a preventive strike, as he once earlier claimed, on the line of control or in Kashmir. So these are things which are likely to happen. But I think one other aspect which is usually forgotten or not understood in its full force is that the relations between Washington and New Delhi are also not the same. They don't have the same warmth as they used to be earlier. And I think there's a lot of disillusionment in Washington, and particularly with regard to Donald Trump, because the bitterness regarding the American and the French planes, the fighter planes. Because Modi has opted for Rafale, the Eurofighter, this has caused a lot of bitterness in Washington about it. It's a multi-billion-dollar deal. So I think things are not going good for Modi. But what I feel a little disappointed about is that there should have been a counter narrative to the communal politics of Modi. But instead of that, what we see is the Congress party being led by Rahul Gandhi is now singing the same song of Hinduism. And this has been a great disappointment to us in Pakistan and probably as well as in India. Because this man is now changing the
narrative
structure of Indian politics by turning it into a religious, ethnic, polity.
Also promoting hardline policies like the JP. Thank you so much, Mr. Sardar Asif. Here, Ms. Sonia, let me quickly come to you. You heard what our guest said. And first of all, I want your take on it. And also in light of what has happened in attacks by cow vigilantes, that up till November, there were 38 such attacks where 10 people were killed during the year. How do you see this? Do you agree that there is a rise of Muslim phobia in India?
Well, see, as one of your guests just said from Dublin, that there was always some sort of alienation against Muslims, but he is partially true. He's partially right, sorry. But what I would rather point out, the Sachar committee had very clearly said that the welfare schemes that was supposed to be benefiting the Muslims, that never happened. So there was always a politics which was played around Muslims, be it by Congress or any other party, but actually those benefits never reached the Muslims. So therefore their condition remained as bad as ever. So, and now what has come out, what he's also writes in saying that, yes, of course, there is this hatred which is now out in open. Things which were people used to maybe discuss within their drawing rooms, now it's all out in open. So, of course, this mob lynching is not being taken down. I mean, people are not accepting it. Now, people who earlier used to, rather bypass this issue, never used to discuss maybe on a WhatsApp message or anything, now they're out and open and putting up their stand on social media. So that's a huge change for a country which actually was swept over by the BJP, the BJP's the huge and vast win that we had seen in 2014. So now things are changing, I would say, and this election is very, very crucial. But before I end up, I actually want to point out something important. Like, let's not mix the human rights issue and India's stance with Pakistan, because India's stance with Pakistan is something which a lot of these governments have already taken earlier, that if you are not going to end terrorism, we'll not talk with you. But what is happening in Kashmir is about the human rights violation that has actually increased manifold. I am not saying that in Congress regime, people were not getting killed. Yes, of course, they were getting killed. And Chidambaram was the home minister in 2010 when 107 children got killed by security forces. And they were, of course, allegedly got killed by security forces. And there was a report also. There were 3-member committee which was formed. They had presented 2 different reports on it. But what has happened is these attacks have intensified. And now it is like we will identify and kill you one by one if you don't toe our line.
Right.
So that harshness was
that is something that is
now
very disturbing, and we're seeing the fallout of that. And here, Mr. Tahir, let me pose this question to you and read it out. Also, a quote by A.S. Dalit. He's the former chief of the research and analysis wing, RAW, and he said that Kashmiri uprising is 100% indigenous. And he said Pakistan is not the only catalyst for the crisis. Talks about the need for Indian government to start talking to it's time that they start talking to separatist leaders in Hurriyat Conference, Pakistan, and other political players. I want to hear your comments on this and whether there is an alienation within the Indian community, or they have started to recognize that it's time to step forth and address the humanitarian crisis in Kashmir.
Well, what I would like to say is this: it's not a human rights issue. Human rights violations are the symptoms, and it is a political issue, and this political issue must be addressed as per the aspirations and the history which is behind it. So as far as the dialogue is concerned, there is a condition put forward by the Hurriyat, which is that Indian government should first recognize that Kashmir is a dispute. Kashmir is a conflict. Unless you do not recognize the first thing, how can you go on in the negotiations? So yes, as far as the Kashmiris are concerned, it is an indigenous movement. There has been element of Pakistani diplomatic help and support to the armed movement in the 1990s, but right now it is completely indigenous. And I want to tell you one thing, that Kashmir has over 30% youth population, and the current movement is run, and at the forefront of this movement are the youth generation who want to see the change, who want to break the status quo, and they are going to go any length.
Thank you for your time here, Mr. Mohammad Tahir and Ms. Sonia Sarkar. Very crucial points from all 3 of our guests on the relationship as it unfolds between Pakistan and India. We'll be talking more about this in our coming shows, but for now, this is all the time we had. We'll see you tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.